Hello everyone, it is Tyler here, and today I am going to be doing my Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Episode 1 and 2 review, spoiler cast, breakdown, and have a chat about lore, what happened in the episodes, my opinions, all that sort of stuff. Now, if you're new to the channel, if you've never heard me talk, never heard me on a podcast, I am a massive Lord of the Rings fan, not just of the movies, but also the books. I am a professional videographer in my personal, professional life outside of making content on YouTube and doing my podcast here. And the only reason I am a professional videographer and studied film and got into movies as a young fella was because of the Lord of the Rings movies and watching the behind the scenes as a kid. They're my favorite movies of all time. They're still my favorite movies of all time. In fact, I have a tattoo here of Andoril, Aragorn's sword, as well as the even star that Arwen gives him in The Lord of the Rings. A sort of combination one. I love the films. I also love the books. The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion, which I just finished my second read through of before the show premiered. So I do love my Tolkien. I am a book purist, I guess you'd say. But I also am a massive diehard fan of the movies. So I will be diving into lore and explaining some things and some backstory about things that happened in episode 1 and 2, but I will not spoil anything for people that are following along about what is going to happen in the future and get specific. I might drop some hints. I might even, if I'm not sure, I'll give theories, but that's only if I'm not sure. And I'll give you some backstory to stuff, but I won't be like spoiling, oh, this character, well, they're involved and this happens. I won't do that. I don't want to do that. I want to go on the journey with you guys. I will be traveling for a few weeks during the season, so I will try to get, it'll probably be way less production quality and screenshots of the episodes within it, but I'll still try to get some sort of breakdowns and episodes of this out during that time. It just might be, I might miss a week and do 2 episodes in 1 week type thing, because I'll just be going all over the world. I'm going to the States, then going to the UK, and I'm here in Australia right now. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to get right into it, but I want to give a general overview first of my opinions on the 2 episodes as they premiered. So this is from the perspective, I guess, of one, a Tolkien fan and a massive Lord of the Rings fan, but also someone that I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about when it comes to film and television. So let's get right into it. And the first thing I want to address is this show has been surrounded by controversy. It has been surrounded by so much nonsense online with people just before it even came out saying it's trash and it's going to be bad and the show's bad and it's terrible and go woke, go broke and all this sort of nonsense. And I'm not of that mind at all. I think it's fucking embarrassing whenever I see it online. You can not like the show, but let's give it some merit. And I think objectively, this show is not trash. I'll say that. It's not perfect by any means. The production quality, I think, is outstanding. I think it's the best looking show I've ever seen made. It feels like you're at a movie theater watching any sort of high budget top film you'd watch. And when it comes to it being the Lord of the Rings and a property within Tolkien, I'm so glad that this is the effort that Amazon has gone to make a Lord of the Rings show. For me, you can't go, in terms of television terms, for low budget. You can't pull the budget back compared to movies, not when it comes to the Lord of the Rings. And if you did, it would cause issues. It wouldn't be what it could be. That's just the truth of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean CGI. That also means getting the costumes right, getting the setting right, and the whole production side of it. And the fact that this first season was filmed in New Zealand is a huge selling point, and as well of why visually this first 2 episodes worked for me. I really liked them. I've watched them several times now. I think 3 times I've watched the 2 episodes through. And I liked it the most probably the second time. The first time I was like, okay, a bit slow pacing, a few issues here and there. I think the only thing that not that I don't like, but that is a negative would be certain character storylines and their pacing. I think the writing's good. I think the actors are fantastic for the most part. Some I'm not quite ready to fully judge yet, but I think in terms of our sort of main characters, I think their casting's phenomenal. I think the acting's fantastic. I think the writing's relatively decent as well. I just think it's more of a, in terms of writing for character, writing for dialogue, I think solid. I think some of the narrative writing pacing's off. That's probably my biggest gripe in terms of how it fits into Tolkien lore. Yes, there's things it brushes over or steps over, but I guess the way I look at it in my head is someone that also appreciates how you need to make and adapt a film or a TV show. And especially with The Lord of the Rings books aren't identical to the Lord of the Rings movies, and though I think those films are the perfect adaptation that you can make from those books, there are things you have to change to make work, and I understand if people can't come to terms with that. There's things that they have different sort of lines in the sand of what the producers can and can't cross in terms of breaking law. And I think for myself, the way I like to see it and with an adaptation is if you can't tell a bit of lore properly, skim over it. Don't address it directly and change it. Just let me imagine that it happened exactly how it happened in the books. And if you need to make any sort of alteration, just sort of brush over it. Like, yeah, that thing happened. How did it happen? Well, if you read the books, you'll know, type thing. So I can be like, yeah, so it still fits. What happened in the book happened, but this is about something different. And that's what this show is mostly like, and that's what I appreciate about the show so far. There are a couple little things, but again, it's hard to tell this early with just 2 episodes. So we are going to get right into it. I will be showing some screenshots throughout to sort of talk through and sort of break down. So let's have a look first. The show obviously opens in Valinor, episode 1. I do have to mention the soundtrack of this show. Bear McCreary, who famous for, at least recently, the latest God of War game. And I hope he's doing God of War Ragnarok that premieres. We're talking about TV shows. I'm talking about video games right now. God of War Ragnarok that releases at the end of this year. I'm sure he's doing that as well. But phenomenal stuff. Howard Shore returned for the main theme. Incredible. Now, I will note, as soon as this show started, visually stunning. Visually stunning. We see Galadriel as a young child among, you'd assume, just a bunch of other elves. Not sure if there's any Maya, Valar, highly doubtful. But probably and most likely other Noldor elves. And Galadriel's making this boat, and it sort of sails down this river. A few of them throw shit at it. It sinks. Now, what I want to point out is in Valinor, for me, I was just in awe of the fact that, as a Tolkien fan, this is a place I never thought I would see on screen. I never thought I would see, let alone a young Galadriel in Valinor, and the lighting and the way they lit this, I thought was amazing. Because, especially considering, and what I mean by the lighting is, there's no sun that exists right now. The sun doesn't exist. There's no moon, there's no sun. There are 2 trees that we see, and they have a sort of night-day cycle about them. They're the only light in the world. And when I imagine that in my head, this is what it looked like. Sort of this like faraway thing that doesn't, it's a sun that doesn't move, you know? So the light that it gives off is what's lighting the world and how that changes throughout the day. And I don't know, I just always imagined it sort of looking like this constant sunset, I guess, this sort of constant beautiful sunset or just before sunset type vibe. And I just loved it. And we see the absolute Chad known as Finrod show up, Galadriel's brother. I'm sorry if I'm very much I feel like such a fucking Australian talking about Tolkien literature. Just does the way I talk about it probably is a bit confusing to some people, but I'm a very casual guy and I will be talking casually about this as much as I'm a nerd for it all. But we see Finrod talk to Galadriel after her ship sunk. He gives her some advice. Just, again, characters never expected to see. And then he walks up over the hill and we see more of Valinor. We see the trees and it's just this incredible view. Again, something I just never thought I'd see. I was in awe already. This opening, I absolutely loved the opening of The Rings of Power. And we sort of get that prologue moment and very much like the hell I wanted to start a Galadriel narrated prologue the same way Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy started. This is how I thought this should have started. I love that it starts this way, mirroring the Lord of the Rings. But instead of telling what happened in the Second Age, it's talking about what happened in the First Age. With Morgoth, or Melkor at this time, at the time he destroyed the trees. Melkor and Ungoliant, this spider that helped Melkor, that was then known as Morgoth from then on. Well, not from this point, actually. We'll talk about that in a second. Destroyed the trees, took all the light from the world. We obviously didn't get to see Morgoth. We didn't get to see Ungoliant. Bit of a shame. I obviously know Amazon don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. They only have the rights to the Lord of the Rings. And what's in the Return of the King appendices. Thankfully, this stuff is, because it's a must-have in it. But just beautiful to actually get to see the trees adapted to screen. It's just amazing. We then see, it sort of transitions us. Something just seeing the shot of all the ships sailing from Valinor to Middle-earth. The Noldor elves led by Valinor. Just pretty incredible. All stuff as a Silmarillion nerd I just loved. I understand they did skim over a lot of important things. For example, within the books, Valinor and the Noldor, Finrod, Galadriel, they don't give two fucks about the trees when Melkor destroys the trees. Well, not that they don't give a fuck, but that's not why they head over to Middle-earth to hunt Melkor. It's because Valinor, and we'll talk about it when we get to episode 2, because my favourite scene, probably the 2 episodes in that, he created the Silmarils. And they were jewels created out of the light from the trees. Now, once the trees were destroyed, the Valar went to Valinor, and Valinor was already pretty pissed at him anyway. He didn't like the Valar by this point. They were begging him, can they have the Silmarils to help revive the trees? And he's like, you can get fucked. Melkor then steals the Silmarils for himself and takes them to Middle-earth. Valinor then, with his sons, makes a vow to hunt down and retrieve the Silmarils and dubs Melkor Morgoth from that moment. And then there's this pretty incredible journey and a lot of politics and a lot of things that go on for Valinor and the Noldor elves to make it to Middle-earth. But again, we skip over that. That's okay. We don't have the rights to the Silmarillion. And I'll accept that it's the trees. Yeah, I get it. Okay. I'm not, in my head, all those events still happen. This show doesn't discount that. It just skims over it. Because it's not what the show's about. It's just sort of setting you up. We know as book readers what happened in those moments to set it up. We know that. And we see Finrod battling in what I assume are one of the great 5 battles that occurred to defeat Morgoth within the Silmarillion over hundreds, thousands of years. This war raged is the word, within Middle-earth, but in a place, in the First Age, Middle-earth was much larger, and there was a region, so if you imagine the Middle-earth map as it is, west of it, there was this whole other part attached called Beleriand, and that's where a lot of this took place. A lot of these battles and the Noldor and a lot of the elves lived, and where they fought Morgoth. Now we see within this next shot, and what I loved about it, again, they didn't have to address it, but they visually showed it, and I know what they were saying. Beleriand, this huge segment of Middle-earth, is then submerged underwater after the First Age, after the many, many battles. So I love visually, one, you see not just elves and orcs fighting each other, because Morgoth is who created the dragons and the trolls and all the evil creatures that we see. So to see the eagles and to see all these different creatures of good and evil fighting, it's not just orcs and elves, that was really special, I thought. And then to see these great cities submerged underwater, that's really important. And as a book fan, you don't need to know as a show viewer what's happening, right? You don't need to know, oh, why is it underwater? Oh, you just see chaos and carnage, and that's what happened. A lot of loss occurred. We get it. But as a book fan, you're like, that's Beleriand under fucking water. And that's awesome. Like, these are just visually things I'm seeing that I'm like, I love that we're getting to see these moments unfold on screen. We then move on to Morgoth is defeated, and his lieutenant, Amaya, known as Sauron, who has been his lieutenant for a long time, thousands of years, is now the big bad, the great evil, the Dark Lord that leads the remaining minions of Morgoth moving forward. And he's who killed Galadriel's brother Finrod, as the show tells us. And Galadriel then swears an oath to hunt down Sauron at all costs and defeat him and kill him, more or less, and defeat the great evil. Now, a lot of people are upset about Galadriel being a warrior within this because she isn't described as that in the books. Now, in my mind, I'm like, Galadriel is one of the most important figures in Tolkien's Legendarium, and there are a lot of, with all due respect from my research, outside of just reading the books and the other like research I've done, because I haven't read all the extended universe books. I've actually just ordered a whole bunch of them. Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, Fall of Gondolin. I'm going to read all those. This show's hyped me up. Rereading the Silmarillion also hyped me up. I'm just obsessed with Tolkien right now, once again. And I love that the show's given me that too. Because even if the show is bad, I'm still deep into Middle-earth lore right now. And loving it. So I'm really thoroughly enjoying that. But I know I've read a lot up about those books without having read them. And there's contradictions about Galadriel as a character. And there's also thousands of years that happen that just skim over. You read a page of Silmarillion, thousands of years take place sometimes on a page. So you mean to tell me you know everything that happened? I can accept that for a period Galadriel was fighting. It's not that big of a stretch when she's so powerful and awesome in every other aspect of the books. One thing that isn't mentioned is her husband, Celeborn, by this point probably should be married. I mean, their child marries Elrond. So, and Elrond's in this. So, look, there's things that are obviously not being addressed. Again, the fact that they're not mentioning it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And that's how I like to visualize a TV or a movie adaptation with any book. So I'm not going to get upset about things that don't happen because they can't do everything. I'm just going to look at what they do. And is it good or is it bad? Is it spit in the face of law? And so far, everything they have done isn't spitting in the face of law. People, I feel like, are just upset, or a lot of people are upset about just because they haven't mentioned something they wanted them to mention. Hey, they can't. Again, if you're upset, that's okay. I'm personally not. I like where it's going. Galadriel is one of my favorite characters in Middle-earth of Tolkien, so buzzing that when they said that she's the main character, I'm like, of course, she has to be. She has to be. Her and Elrond, when you're dealing with Second Age and characters that need to be important and are of consequence to the future storylines to connect us through to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You're talking about, first of all, you're only talking about elves. And you're talking about Elrond or you're talking about Galadriel. Both in this, love that. Obviously, there's a few others. Gil-galad, etc. And then, obviously, we'll see, we haven't seen them yet, but the Númenóreans, Elendil and Isildur, who we'll see later on in the show, but not in episode 1 and 2. Okay. So we've been set up. We're in Middle-earth now. We've left Valinor. The Noldor have spent the first age amongst other elves and men that sided on the side of good. And I'll explain that in the next week, because once we get to Númenor, I'll dive into the Númenóreans for those who don't know their backstory. But that's involved. But I will be talking a bit about, when we get to the Southlands plot, about the men that lived in Middle-earth that sided with Morgoth. But there were a group of men that sided with the Valar, that sided on the side of good, that sided with the elves. And they were rewarded with long life, known as the Dunedain, and that's where Númenor came from. Again, get into more and more detail next week. But for now, here we are in Middle-earth. I'm going to do this in order, not in order of the show, but in order of each storyline. So I'll go over one storyline at a time for each episode. So let's talk about Galadriel first. She's far in the north of Middle-earth, hunting with a group of elves for Sauron. For any clue of Sauron, they've been away for months, apparently. And obviously for centuries have been hunting him, and many people have sort of given up, but Galadriel's still 100%, all guns are blazing. Her company are not so happy with that, and eventually, sorry, we've skipped ahead there, and eventually they sort of turn on her. I liked the opening. I loved this, I'm not sure if it is a part of lore, not that I'm aware of, this ice fortress, but there is a line that's very important that said, it's so evil that so that they had obviously flaming torches, and Galadriel says, well, one of the elves says, I can't feel my hand, but Galadriel says, no, it's not that you can't feel your hand, it's this place is so evil, the torches don't give off any heat. Important line to remember for later. That's how cold it is there. So, Ice Troll fight happens, people are upset that Galadriel's badass and kicked ass, and the other elves were a bunch of bitches. I disagree with this, because I heard that, and then I've now watched it twice since hearing that. But how I feel about that scene was an ice troll caught a bunch of very strong elves off guard. I'm sure all of those elves could have taken out that troll, but he caught 3 of those elves off guard, and then one of the elves gave Galadriel an assist, and then she took out the troll. I don't necessarily feel like, one, it established Galadriel's tough, but I don't think it had to take away, just because you're pumping up one character doesn't mean it's taking away from the others. And I don't know why it's such a fucking issue with everyone. But apparently it is because, yeah, I don't know. People get upset about things. People are fucking weird. After they sort of head back, Galadriel doesn't want to. She wants to keep finding Sauron, but the company's like, we're not fucking following you. We head back to Lindon, in the far west coast of Middle-earth, where in the capital of the High Elves, and Elrond we see there, and there's some dialogue that goes on here that I want to just talk about briefly for those who might not understand. And they pretty much, firstly, they tell Elrond that he's not welcome to this council meeting, or whatever. And the reason for that is because he's half elf. And a lot of people don't know, but Elrond is half an elf, part man, but also he's related to Maya and Valar in his bloodline. So he's got a lot of mixed blood in him. But after Morgoth was defeated, when Númenor was being founded, Elrond and his brother were given an option to take the life of the firstborn, being the elves, or that of the secondborn, that of man. But again, the Dunedain have extended lives compared to a regular human. Elrond's brother took that life and became the first king of Númenor. Elrond chose the life of an elf. That's why in The Lord of the Rings, or The Hobbit, you might not know and you might not realize, really, like, well, Elrond's an elf, obviously. Well, actually, he's not, but he did choose the immortal life of an elf. He is immortal still, but that was his choice. But that might be the reason that you don't know, that you don't realize. You're like, wait, why wasn't he invited to this council meeting? That's the reason. That's the reason he wasn't. We then go to the scene. We see Gil-galad for the first time, and this is probably the only character that's a bitch compared to the books so far. Again, haven't seen a lot of him, but Gil-galad is a bitch. He is a bitch. He just is. And that's unfortunate as of right now. Especially him giving this grand speech and Elrond's mouthing it because he obviously wrote it for him. Which I love, because Elrond, I love in this show. He's absolutely fucking awesome. The way that he's been portrayed so far, really enjoying Elrond and Galadriel. They're my two favorites. And we'll get to episode 2 because my other favorite character is in episode 2. But essentially Galadriel's given and her company this reward to head home to Valinor, to the Undying Lands, and of which they cannot return once they go. That's sort of how it works when you go. It's not easy to leave Valinor. It wasn't just they open up, a bunch of ships flew through, like sort of visualize. It's a much more difficult task, especially when it's a gift given by the Valar to you. It's like a bit living on a different planet in the sense of how it works. And there's a reason why men can't go. Well, I'm sure we'll get into it in another episode of this. We're not going to quite get into it today. But anyway, they're given that reward, and Galadriel doesn't want it. She wants to stay and fight Sauron, and everyone else is like, bitch, we want to go fucking home. Please shut up, because you'll ruin it for all of us. That's sort of what it was like, and she didn't want to do that, and there's a bit of peer pressure, and Elrond pretty much tells her, look, you have to go. You have to let it go. The evil's gone. And I love the sets in this. And there's a set in the forest at night where Elrond and... Oh, there's Gil-galad, bit of a bitch. Don't know why that image is so small. Thought it was bigger than that. Love the fireworks. Love a bit of Lord of the Rings fireworks. We see that in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. Shout out to Gandalf. Not Gandalf this time. Well, not yet. Well, we don't know. We'll get into that in a minute. Some fireworks, and then this scene between Elrond and Galadriel. And they chatting, and Galadriel's more or less saying, I can't go. She's got this darkness in her. She's got this drive within her, and she knows she must follow it. And it links back to that conversation with Finrod at the beginning of the episode. How do I know which light to follow? And Finrod says, and we hear later, you only know which light to follow when you've seen the darkness. Or that's not word for word, don't quote me on that, but along those lines. And it's a great scene, and to see the sets here of these trees, the carvings within the trees, and sort of memorials or gravestones for elves fallen in these great wars. And I just thought that was quite a beautiful set piece that would exist there in Lindon. Galadriel and co head on a ship to Valinor. It opens up, and we see these beautiful white birds of sorts fly through, and I love that because that does link back to the books. It is told a lot when ships, I don't necessarily know if it's going into Valinor, but ships that would come from the Undine Lands or from certain places of the Elves to Numenor, there would be, these boats would come, and these white birds would come with them, would come with the ship. So I did sort of love that little touch there from the books as well. Galadriel ultimately pretty much says, fuck that, though, is the other thing. I love the way they did it because a lot of, again, small touches, they keep talking about these songs that you'll hear when you live in Valinor, and so much of the early chapters of the Silmarillion and the forming of Valinor and the forming of the world is through, and Iluvatar, who's God essentially, does it through song. And everyone has their own song. So the fact that they all start sort of singing this hymn of sorts as Valinor opens up to them, as these doors open up to them, is very interesting. And the light sort of goes to swallow them, and Galadriel knows, I can't leave. I can't leave until Sauron's defeated. And, she knows she may never get that chance again to go home. This may be it. So, it's quite an interesting moment, and a big character moment. And obviously we knew that was coming because this is our main character, and she's got to fight the big bad. So shout out to Galadriel, who jumped into the ocean and pretty much had no plan, obviously, from there. But you can sort of see how superhuman the elves are, because she pretty much tirelessly swims hundreds of kilometers, probably. I don't know how long it is, but she has no idea where to go. But again, plot armor, again, TV show. Not my... We'll get into this in episode 2, because I loved Galadriel's storyline in this first episode. Loved everything they did with her, actually. It's episode 2 where I've got some questions, and it just sort of slowed down a bit and got a bit like, okay. But that's what it is when it comes to week-to-week shows sometimes, when you don't know what's going to happen next, so you don't have the opportunity to see what happens next. You're sort of sitting there waiting. And that's when the pacing can become issues. Because again, this show didn't feel like a TV show. It felt like a movie. It really did. The next plot line, let's go to the Southlands. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Probably my least favorite storyline of the show. Beautiful scenery. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful scenery. So we have a few main characters here. We have Arondir, who I don't believe is, in fact, I know for certain, isn't a Tolkien character, but is a original written character. Again, I'm not that bothered by things like this because there's thousands of years of history. We don't know every human being. As long as they're well-written characters, I don't mind. haven't seen quite enough of Arendir to have a positive or negative opinion. Just sort of fine at this point. But I like the way they've set up the world. Of the elves are sort of watching over the humans at this point. And for those people that don't understand, is any human that doesn't live in Numenor at this point, for the most part, the Numenorians were the men that sided with good during the wars against Morgoth. Everyone else in the main, and Numenor is also an island now off the coast of Middle-earth, so every man at this point that is on mainland Middle-earth were probably related to a bunch of humans that fought with Morgoth on the side of evil. So the elves are sort of watching over them as well, in case the uprising of evil doesn't come from necessarily just orcs, but also from men. So they're almost watching them also. And you see hints of that. And if you don't know that backstory, you're like, why the fuck are the elves watching over the humans? Like, yeah, it might not make too much sense. We also see a bit of a love story going on with another character, Bronwyn, another original character of the show, I believe. Again, this image is small and terrible. My apologies for that. I'm just sort of going off vibe here when I got to fold together a bunch of screenshots. And again, this is the, the star-crossed lovers, the Romeo and Juliet, the you can't be together sort of plot line that is the most essential Tolkien plot thread there is. It's the first thing Tolkien ever really wrote in the world of Middle-earth. Beren and Luthien, that's what that story is. He based it off himself and his wife. Wrote the first poem of them in the trenches of World War I. We see it reflect in The Lord of the Rings with Aragorn and Arwen. We see Peter Jackson try to do it again in The Hobbit. With, I don't even remember Evangeline Lilly's elf name. Toriel, that's it. And Keely. The dwarf, but that was more like not a man and an elf, a dwarf and an elf, but in this case it's a woman and an elf. But it's such an important sort of thread because they're such a big part of Tolkien narratives and of Middle-earth storylines is about the mortality versus immortality. It builds so many of the relationships within the world. It's why races don't get on. It's why elves don't get along with a lot of people. With dwarves or with men. Because they can't relate to each other. They look at the world so differently because of their mortality. And we'll see that really well reflected in episode 2. This storyline doesn't quite do that, other than them saying it's not going to work. Why? They don't explain it. We then see Theo. That's his name, right? Theo? Pretty sure it is. Bit of a... Yeah, it is Theo. Cool. I've got the list here. Not the sharpest tool in the shed, though he may have the sharpest tool in the shed with this Morgul blade. I don't know what sort of blade it is. It's got the mark of Sauron on it. We see his blood connect to it in the next episode. But Theo's a bit of a troublemaker, doesn't trust the elves. Meanwhile, his mother, we don't know who his father is. We have some ideas. Get into that episode too. But in this first episode, Theo's a bit of a troublemaker. Got bad guy vibes in the future off of him. We'll see where it goes. But got bad guy vibes off of him right now. Yeah, it doesn't do too much. Pretty much stays at the house. We see him with the sword. Sauron's symbol. That's about it. Southland storyline. Look, it was okay first episode. It was fine. Probably my least favourite of both episodes. Picks up better in the second episode for sure, but in this first episode it's sort of introductory. And it did feel to me like as a book reader, I understand what the lay of the land is here, but I don't think it made a lot of sense to a regular person. I've watched this a couple of times and I watch it with different people each time, and they're all movie fans and they all really loved the show, but they all also said, thank God we watched it with you so you could explain shit like this to us. Because it did, obviously would improve the viewing experience to know a bit more of the backstory, because you're sort of like asking questions like, wait, why? I don't get why the elves are watching the humans. I don't get why there's the tension there. Things like that. All right, let's go to one of the next sections, which is the Harfoots, the hobbits of this world. Again, not a part of the Tolkien literature, before the Shire, there's not a lot known of the hobbits. So this is all original stuff, which is dangerous. But I will say, I absolutely adore the Harfoots. I love the hobbits in this. If you can't have a Lord of the Rings product on TV without hobbits, it feels like home, and they made these hobbits feel like home. Yes, they don't live in the Shire. They haven't settled there yet. They're living in secret. They're travelers. You know, they don't have a place to call home. They travel the world seasonally, and they hide away from all the other beings, from men and elves and dwarves and all others. So they're more like myths than anything else, which I just love that that's the way they're being portrayed within this world. We get a beautiful introduction to see what they look like. Their soundtrack is just fantastic. We see how they sort of hide away and then reset up their camp. Loved it. Loved the music, loved the vibe. All the actors, when you look at them, hobbits have a certain look. They all felt like hobbits. And I really like that. And I really like Nori, our main character, Nori Brandyfoot. And as well as all the other sort of side cast, this elder hobbit, who I don't know, what is the name of this bloke here? Is he on the list? I don't know. I can't see. But, here we go. Sadok Burrows is the name, played by Lenny Henry. Sort of the elder of the tribe, if you will. But I love these characters because it felt like hobbits in terms of, yes, they're very welcoming, very homely, but they're also very nosy and judgmental. And I love that was also included in there. And we see our main character here, Nori Brandyfoot, who I thought she was fantastic. Felt very Frodo-esque, and has that Elijah Wood look to her as well. It's probably the big blue eyes, I'd say, and even the hairdo really as well. But she's got that sense of adventure that we see from our favorite hobbits. That sense of there's got to be more that's out there, and all the other hobbits and her mother is like, no, we don't go out, we don't travel. Men, they deal with their fields of crops. Dwarves, their mines. Elves, their woods. We travel. We go from place to place. We stay safe. We stay together. But Nori here has other ideas. And I love that. I just love everything they did with the Harfoots. I really, really did. Great vibes there. And just the scenery, the setting, and getting to know sort of everyone in the tribe just a little bit. I thought they did really well, and the sets, outstanding stuff. The props, everything, great. But then later in the episode, we see and have hints of the sky's strange, and we saw that Sadok Burrows here, this elder, he'd been sort of, there'd been hints of things. There were wolves where there shouldn't be already where they were. There was hunters traveling. They're like, what's going on down south? What's happening there? And obviously in the Southlands storyline, we see that as well. What's going on down south? We don't know. But there's something sort of stirring. And then we see a meteor fly through the air, and it crosses Linden. So that's the west coast. So you're assuming it's coming from Valinor. You have to assume it's coming from Valinor if it's crossing the west coast, going all the way north of Mordor and north of the Southlands, towards where we see that the Harfoots are at this point in time. And that's where we see this man pretty much arise from the meteor. In my mind, a Maya that's been sent by the Valar. Who it is, I don't know yet. I have ideas. We'll get into that in a second within the next episode, but Jesus. That's a way you kick off the show, and I loved, in terms of highlights for me, I loved the Harfoots, what they did there, because I was very worried about what they were doing with the hobbits, it not being book-related. Galadriel was great. The Elrond stuff was great, though he gets way better in the second episode. The prologue just kills me every time. I think it's outstanding. It's just the Southland storyline was a bit slow for me. A bit dull. The characters hadn't really got me yet. But let's get to episode 2. We're going to go straight into it from where the Harfoot storyline picked up. We'll go plotline to plotline. So, let's go. I've got it up. Okay, we've got the screenshots for episode 2 up. There we go. Lovely. I want to jump straight into the Harfoots again. We pick up with Nori and this man that's collapsed on the ground from this meteor, right? And he sort of rises out. Now, important line, and I brought this up earlier, the line from Galadriel in the Ice Castle. She said, "It's so evil, the torches don't give off any heat." Now, Nori goes and touches one of the flames and says it's not hot. Look, that to me is a sign of evil. That's the first hint of evil to me. Now, I'm just going to throw it out there right from the get-go. I think whoever this character is not good. There's a couple of hints. It could be someone else that is good. But I feel like there's a lot more hints that it's someone that's not good. And maybe the hints of them not being good isn't about them necessarily as much as it's about the world that's been corrupted around them. And they're trying to make it, get that lay of the land. They're getting that read for the world and realizing shit's not right. It could be a bit of a twist there that they're trying to set us up for. It could be. It really could. Now, Nori and her sister, they take this man who's unconscious at this time from the meteor, and she's sort of like, look, this guy's come to me. I've got to help him. She hides him away, goes back to the village. He's passed out. She comes back the next day, and he's up and about. He's gone. But he's also a fucking lunatic and can't speak properly, and he's makes these carvings, and he looks like a giant. Again, she's a young hobbit, so there's obviously going to be a size difference. But to me, one, he's got clear use of magic. We see that's made very clear. It's not a man, not an elf either, so it's a Maya, most certainly. For those who don't know, the Valar are like the gods, the top tier gods, just below Iluvatar, who is God, who created them. They're the Valar. Manwë is their sort of the head Valar. And then a sort of sub-Valar, the next tier below them is Maya. That's Sauron, that's Gandalf, Saruman, the other wizards. Among other figures as well, within Middle-earth. And within the universe. This is a Maya, almost certainly. I bet my fucking house on it. Yeah? Is it a wizard? I don't know. Is it Sauron? Maybe. Is it Gandalf? Maybe. We see one of the carvings looks like the exact same symbol that Gandalf carves on the door in Bag End, in The Hobbit. Is this just an Easter egg and they're sort of trying to pull our leg here? I'm not too sure. I'm really not. But at the end, we do see there are moments, and it sounds like with the music that plays, I believe it's Sauron's theme at certain points, and I feel like it's the language of Mordor being spoken at different times, sort of being whispered in the background in my latest watch through, and I just got evil vibes in that sense as well. And then when looking up at the stars and taking the fireflies to sort of be like, I need to find where these stars are. That's sort of where this plotline's going. Nori's going to help this Maya find where the stars are located. The fireflies that he used then die. So I get a lot of evil vibes. I get a bunch of people think it might be Gandalf. It might be. I don't know how I feel about it all if it is Gandalf. I'm not necessarily against it, but I don't really need it or want it. But it's just strange, the meteor, everything. How it's being done, I'm very confused by. I'm not sure who it is. I really don't know. I do think it's a bad guy, though. That's the hints I'm getting. That's a vibe I'm going off. But again, Gandalf, you've got the Easter egg of one sort of looks like a bit of a young Gandalf in a way, right? A Maya, also same race. The symbol from the piece of wood that you see in The Hobbit. But the biggest one being that Hobbit connection, right? Now, Gandalf the Grey, the job of the Grey Wizard was to be a man of the people and connect with all races and have those relationships. That's Gandalf's job and role as the Grey. So that doesn't necessarily mean he had favoritism to the hobbits. He just knew all races. So of course he was friends with hobbits. He was friends with men, elves, everyone. That was the Grey's job. But it still is that nice connection for a fan to watch, to make that link of, well, Gandalf and the hobbits have a special bond that the hobbits don't have with anyone else outside their race, really. So it just, that makes a lot of sense as well as a hint. So is it Gandalf? Maybe. I'm like 65% leaning to a bad guy, 35% leaning to Gandalf. If it's a good guy, it's almost certainly Gandalf. That's my 2 cents of that. But I'd be willing to bet if I had to go one way, it's big bad. And that's Harfoot's storyline, and we'll see where that goes next week. Let's jump back into the Southlands. Again, this episode definitely picked up a lot more. We head to Bronwyn's home village, which isn't far away, which pretty much been burnt down, and we see tunnels that have been dug underneath. And I love the way they've explained that, because, of course, that's the orcs can't travel through the day, not at this stage. They can't travel within the light, so they move at night. But I love that they're digging tunnels to sort of work 24/7 to infiltrate these towns and tear them apart from the inside. And we see Arondir sort of crawl down and he gets taken away. We haven't seen what happens to him. That's sort of where he sort of ends this episode, where he's sort of retreating from an orc and then gets pulled into this black hole, and it's fucking terrifying. But we saw it in the trailer, so you sort of knew it was coming. Then we head back to Bronwyn, who heads home, and Theo's hiding in a little, not a fireplace, but some sort of little nook in the wall. And then Bronwyn hides in a closet because there's an orc there. This orc looks terrifying, and I love the fact, because we're so used to seeing orcs as these figures that just get mauled and beat so easily. So I love that in this particular instance, this one orc is so menacing and horrifying because they're just regular people. Bronwyn's a herbalist and a healer. Theo's a kid. This one orc is fucking life-threatening and terrifying to them. And I love the way they played that off, and looked like a pretty fucked up orc, to be fair, and the strength it had throwing the table across the room as well. But they fight it off and realize they need to get the fuck out of there, and Bronwyn pretty much takes the head of the orc and takes it to the inn and says, guys, if you want to live, we got to make for the Elven Tower. And they're all gathering and then heading that way. And we see in that moment Theo's blood connect with that sword, and it sort of start to grow and glow, and Sauron's symbol really strengthening. So is Theo potentially down the road going to turn evil? Is he does he become a ring wraith? Lots of theories out there. I'm not too sure yet, but I'm keeping a close eye on Theo. He seems fucked. Arondir has been captured, at least I think. And everyone else in the Southlands is heading for the Elven Tower for safety, because the orcs are taking over, and that's obviously what's moving things from the south up into the north that the Harfoots are seeing as well. So these threads are sort of slowly connecting with each other, and they all obviously relate to Sauron, which takes us back to one Galadriel storyline, but also Elrond's storyline here, because he talks to Gil-galad, who wants him to partake in assisting a very important elf, Celebrimbor, one of the great elven smiths, on a mission. So then we head to Eregion, realm of the elven smiths, where we get my favorite scene from these 2 episodes, which is this one. We head to Celebrimbor's workshop or house, whatever. Looks very comfortable there. And we see, oh boy, this is just a nerd's wet dream for Tolkien. Feanor's hammer. This is the hammer that crafted the Silmarils. I talked earlier in the episode about what the Silmarils are, these jewels made from the light of the trees, the great trees of Valinor. And to see that hammer, and then them explain more or less the Silmarillion storyline, in a sense, in terms of the best they could hint towards it, where they talk about the Silmarils and, you know, Celebrimbor's motivations for what he's about to do. And again, I don't want to spoil things, so we're not going to get too deep into what he's about to do. But we know from this episode he wants to build a great forge to craft something as special, more special than his grandfather. Celebrimbor's grandfather is Feanor, the great super Giga Chad Noldor High Elf. And just them talking about the Silmarils, talking about Feanor, talking about how after Morgoth stole the Silmarils, he spent so much time just staring into their beauty, he almost turned to good. But then a tear dropped onto them that he cried, and the reflection showed his evil self, and then he sort of broke the days that he was under from the Silmarils. That's how amazing creation that Feanor made with this hammer here. And his grandson, Celebrimbor, wants to outdo that, wants to make something as special as the Silmarils, and he needs this great forge to do it. That's all we know. Now, do I know what's about to happen? Yeah, I do. Some people do know. Please don't spoil it for people. But again, very exciting, and we'll get more and more into it as the show progresses and the storyline progresses. But I just loved this dialogue scene of Celebrimbor explaining his motivation for what he's about to do, because what he's about to do is very important to the show. And I think it's just a really cool to root it back to the Silmarillion, to root it back to Feanor and his grandfather, the Silmarils, Morgoth. I love that. I love that motivation for him. And then Elrond says, look, you need an army to build this forge. I don't have that in Elves, but I know a guy. Next thing we know, we go to Khazad-dûm, to the Dwarves. And again, another shot here, beautiful shot. Celebrimbor holding the hammer. Just, I love this scene. Love it. So they head to Khazad-dûm, a place that we see in The Lord of the Rings, in the Mines of Moria sequence. Gandalf dies here. It's section, obviously, it's a fucking massive place. And Elrond essentially isn't welcome like he thought he would be. To his friend Prince Durin IV. The line that again lines and connects with Thorin Oakenshield from The Hobbit. So there is that connection. If you don't know the line of Durin, obviously there's thousands of years between now and those events, but there is that connection there. We then see him finally invited in, but not so welcome. He has to do this rock smashing challenge with Durin. And honestly, I'll give this show this. This is the best depiction of the dwarves of anything on screen with Tolkien. Obviously, nothing's going to be Gimli, but in terms of we get to see proper dwarven culture. We saw bits of it in The Hobbit, but I preferred this. I loved this. Regular people living in a breathing city, vibrant, and I love Durin IV. This is my favorite character of this show are these two guys right here, and Galadriel. But I loved these two here. Their relationship dynamic was great. I loved the storyline. And as well, it's such an important storyline to have within a Middle-earth piece of fiction, right? The mortal versus immortal. To some people watching the screen, it might not mean a lot, but it's such an important part of the books, of not necessarily relationships where this is a focus, but just the way each race is talked about and how they live their life so differently because of their mortality. And of course, that's going to affect relationships. And we see it here because to Elrond, he goes off and does things for decades, for centuries, because he's going to live forever. It's not a big deal. He knows he'll see these people. I'll see you in 100 years, not a big deal. Like, I know it's a long time, but I will see you because I'll live forever. I'm going to go do this thing and live in this region and learn this art and study this or work with this person. It's not a big deal. But to Durin, a dwarf, 20 years is, in his words, a lifetime. I've lived a lifetime. And I loved that because Elrond has no idea. He's just oblivious to it. He's like, so what? It's only been 20 years. Like, that's not that long. It's a blink of an eye. And he doesn't appreciate, he's not empathizing with Durin, his friend, who's like, I got married, I have kids, and you're one of my best friends, and you missed it all. And to me, it's like you don't care, but to Elrond, it's like, well, that's how long I just normally don't see everyone. That's not a massive deal. So I just love that dynamic and how that played off. And how eventually they came to that common ground of like, Elrond's like, oh shit, I fucked up, that's my bad. And Durin going like, yeah, look, I get it. You don't understand. We are different. And there's so much within the novels of like, that's such a big reason that the dwarves and elves don't get on. That men and dwarves and elves, like there's just a reason everyone doesn't get along so well unless there's a great evil for them to fight with each other against, like a Morgoth, like a Sauron. They don't normally fight with each other or work together that often. There's phases and waves of history where there's good relations and bad relations, and it comes down to the fact it's not them as beings, it's the mortality versus immortality. it's such a key theme with these relationships, and I love that it's being explored here. I love that. And we see just some really great dialogue between these two guys, and eventually we head to Durin's house. Terrible photo quality I got for this one. We meet his wife, Dizza. I love her. I love that Elrond walks in and she hugs him, and clearly Durin talks about Elrond all the fucking time. And the seedling that Elrond gave him, he's grown and made grow within the mines. And there was some great dialogue in this scene. I absolutely loved this at the dinner table. And Durin's still mad at him. And it's like, you're not staying for dinner, but eventually they come to that sort of common ground. He's still like, I'm still angry, but I'll let it go because you're right. I know who you are, and I know you're not a bad guy. I know you're my friend, and I know you do care, and you've shown that. And the line, I forget the exact wording, but him talking about that line of, how can it not grow in a house of love like this, something like that. But it was a beautiful line, and I thought Elrond had some really good dialogue. He was the MVP of this episode for me, Elrond and Durin. Love this storyline. We move on. Before we move on, Durin then goes to his father. They open a chest. There's a jewel there. I'm not quite sure what it's going to be, but they're pretty much talking about how they feel like they've got the upper hand on everyone. They're the ones holding all the cards in their hand. But Durin does take his proposal to his father. We'll see how that works. Will the dwarves help Elrond and help Celebrimbor build their forge? We'll find out next episode or in the future. We move on to Galadriel's storyline, where we meet Halbrand, I believe is his name. I think I'm right about that. And yes, Halbrand. And he's from the Southlands also, and their ship that he was a part of is broken apart by this sea snail, the sea worm, sea snake type giant creature. So Galadriel's lucky enough to stumble upon, and you just see how OP elves are, just swimming for days and not a stress, no sweat. But he seems a bit, I'm not too sure about him. He's got a bit of a dark side, got a bit of past to him, got a bit of that rugged look to him. And we see him sort of save himself and leave the rest of the crew to die when the worm comes and attacks them again. But he does help Galadriel back onto the boat, and the two of them have a bit of dialogue. She sort of wants to use him so she can get what she wants, to get men, get supplies, go find Sauron. And he's like, yeah, no, I'm not just going to help you just cause you're here. You can't help me because he was saying his village was destroyed. You'd assume by orcs, because we know there's been orcs in the Southlands destroying villages. Is this guy Theo's father also? That's another theory. Don't know. But there's the potential there that this is Theo's dad. And we see this symbol as well. Not sure what it is. But got something hidden away, as well as this sort of, whether it's a family symbol of some kind, I'm not sure. What's his past like? Was his family, were they servants of Morgoth too? You'd think so. But not too sure just yet. A storm hits. They barely survive. Halbrand saves Galadriel. This underwater scene, him sort of saving her when she submerged. Beautiful scene. I really just... The soundtrack makes the show. If this soundtrack wasn't this good, the show would be this good. I'm just going to put that out there. But we end the episode with a ship finding, the day after the storm, Galadriel and Halbrand, and you'd presumably rescue them or capture them or whatever, but we do know, by looking at it, the one shot we got, that it's a Númenórean ship. A Númenórean ship. So we're hopefully going to Númenor next episode, meeting Elendil, a bunch of other characters. It's all very exciting. So those are the two episodes of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. What did you think about it? Let me know down in the comments below. I really enjoyed them. I really enjoyed it. I really love the show. I just love being back in Middle-earth. I don't think anything they've done in this show is that lore-breaking to the books that it bothers me that much. They actually talked about a lot of stuff that I loved, and there were a lot of Easter eggs that I'm like, that's so cool. They didn't have to directly oh, and this story happened from the Silmarillion. They just hinted at it like a normal conversation they would have. And I'm like, I know what they're talking about. As a book fan, I love that stuff. I don't need them to tell word for word, page for page what happened in a book. I love that they can tell their story and fit it into the world that I know happens in the future with the Lord of the Rings and happened in the past with the Silmarillion. So I'm very, very excited for the next episode. I did feel like the Galadriel storyline in that second episode was a bit weak, but we had to get to Numenor somehow and bring Halbrand into it somehow. Whether he's good or bad, time will tell. Loved Elrond and Durin in that second episode. I want to see more of that dynamic going forward. And again, that's probably the storyline right now I'm most intrigued by with Celebrimbor, where that's going. I really want to see the progress of that, because that really is going to tie into the future of the show big time. The Harfoots with our Maya character, again, really loving, keen to see where that goes as well. Obviously Galadriel is about to head to Numenor. Get to see Numenor on screen for the first time, a big major factor. Excited to talk about Numenor and the Numenorians in the next episode of this particular show, and break that down as well. So that's really exciting. The Southlands storyline, look, it's fine right now. I'm neither here nor there for it. I like the way they're showing the orcs sort of rising up again and the tunnels they're digging and that sort of stuff's cool. The way they portrayed the orcs in this episode, again, very cool. But I'm not that sold on all the characters involved. I'm not that invested in all of them, to be totally honest. But overall, really love the show. It's not perfect by any means, but super solid. We're back in Middle-earth. The soundtrack brings you in. The production quality brings you in. The sets are amazing. The New Zealand landscape, always amazing. And I thought the acting and dialogue was really good. Just some plot that's not quite selling it to me in some ways. Some pacing, not quite selling to me in some ways. But again, I've loved it. All my friends that have watched it with me have loved it. And I hope you guys did too. Let me know your thoughts of the first two episodes down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week for another spoiler cast breakdown of this. In the next couple of days, the next episode on the Four Pillars Network here, the As Always podcast comes out. I'll be talking to James about the Rings of Power as well. And episode 2 and 3 of House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones spin-off show that's on at the moment. So much fantasy going on. I feel so spoiled. But again, thank you so much for tuning in and watching this episode. And I'll see you guys next week. Thank you. And goodbye.